Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'll be presenting the results of my interprofessional investigation of my recommendations for Agbobashi. So first, a problem description. Agbobashi is in Accra, which is the capital of Ghana. It is a heavily polluted industrial scrapyard. So in this, workers manually disassemble parts and burn off the plastic encasements of wires to recover the metal underneath. So this is working with e-waste. So these wires are like fridge wires, computer wires, etc. So this is usually done by young people without any personal protective equipment. So this site presents serious health risks to workers because they're exposed to a lot of chemicals and heavy metals, including PAH and lead. And then after the valuable metal is extracted at this site, the scraps are dumped untreated into unlined pits and waterways and burned, which affects the quality of the local soil, air, and water, and also leaves the big cloud of smoke that you can see in and around the site. So I solicited the perspectives of 3 different professionals to sort of come up with ways to address this issue. So the first professional that I asked about this situation was a banker. So she said that she would begin by addressing the impacts that this has on the community. From a financial perspective, she would look at the medical costs that would incur based on the extreme exposure of all pollutants that these individuals are facing. So she would present this to the government in order to persuade them to buy protective gear for the workers. She would next look at buying protective gear for these individuals. She would buy these items in bulk so that she would actually be able to attain them at a cheaper price, since the cost of protective gear is probably one big reason as to why the scrap metal site doesn't provide these for their workers in the first place. And then another way to potentially buy protective gear is to impose a fee for whatever parties are dumping there, or increase the fee if one already exists. So this could be used to offset the costs of personal protective workers, as well as dissuade and discourage potential dumpers from dumping such a high quantity of e-waste at the site. So she said ideally it would be ideal to move this waste to a less populated location. So this location is actually right by like a major commercial center and has the potential to seep into the water. So moving it to a less populated location would sort of minimize the exposures and associated health outcomes that people are experiencing. So she said that you could argue that once you implement a high fee, it would actually probably be cheaper for companies to ship their waste somewhere else to this less populated location than to pay this high fee. So the next recommendations I looked at were from an engineer. So the engineer's first recommendation was to change the way that workers pull plastic off of cables. So he said that when stripping cables, they should put the wire in boiling water and pull the wire out with a Torsen wrench. So if you boil plastic cables, it's usually much easier to pull out the copper inside, as opposed to the current practice of people burning the plastic off and then extracting the wire from inside. So this would minimize the time that workers are, handling the wire, and it would also make it so that they're not being exposed to whatever toxins are in the actual plastic when they burn it, because it would be boiled. So then his second recommendation was to set up a recycling center to process whatever plastic remains once the workers have extracted the metal from the scraps. So this would allow the site to make more money off of the recycled plastic, and they could even use this money to improve conditions, including through buying personal protective equipment. So the last professional I spoke to was a teacher. She recommended that we should harness the local universities. Specifically, she said to ask the engineering, material science, and chemistry, capstone classes, majors, departments, etc., to find a better use for the plastic rather than just dumping it, and see what ideas they come up with. This is a really ideal solution because the people who are locals are going to understand the situation of the community a lot better than someone else who's coming in. So that would sort of circumvent potential problems that come up with not knowing how things work locally. She also recommended that we should try to make a job of those sorting through the waste a somewhat regulated profession, so that they could wear protective gear, spend limited hours working, etc. So maybe this could be taken on by the public policy students at the local schools. And she also said that ideally you could incorporate some sort of filtration system where workers find the devices that don't really need to go into the waste pile, and could refurbish or sell those so that there's overall less garbage for them to sort through. So all in all, I think that these professionals came up with really creative, functional, and diverse solutions. There were some common themes, including recommending the use of personal protective equipment and thinking through how we might financially support the use and buying of personal protective equipment. And then there were also a lot of different diverse ideas, which highlights the value of having an interdisciplinary team in the first place. So I think that one of the first things that can be implemented in the short term was the engineer's suggestion for changing the way that workers take plastic off of the wires. Other recommendations will be more long-term, but they will also get more at the root of the problem. So these include the teacher's recommendation to start a partnership with local students and universities to think of long-term engineering and policy solutions, as well as the banker's idea to implement a fee system for the people who are dumping. So thank you very much.